This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bear Boat Alaska. Up your DIY hunting game with one of their 37-foot adventure yachts. You and 5 of your friends can hunt, fish, set crab pots, shrimp pots, and take DIY to the next level. Bear Boat Alaska is locally owned by a Ketchikan resident who lives here year-round. Call Larry at 907-617-4542 or go to bearboatalaska.com. That's B-A-R-E boatalaska.com and tell Larry you heard about it on this podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. Going to do a solo episode here to kind of recap my spring bear experience. Big fan of spring bear hunting, mostly because it's just a different pace than a lot of the other hunts that are going on. August, you wait all year for that. That's the favorite hunt. And so you want the weather to be good and you want to have a good opportunity up there. But when spring comes around and you just made it through another Alaska winter and you have the opportunity to kind of go out there, it ends up becoming just kind of a fun bear camping trip. And you don't have that same pace or that same frenetic sort of, oh my gosh, we got to make something happen here. If you get one, cool. If not, kind of whatever. Especially felt that this spring because my wife and I are building a house, and so we're staying with friends. And, it's one thing to bring a deer back that's kind of small that, you're processing or you're vacuum packing, wrapping, whatever, making some sausage out of it. But bringing a bear into someone else's house, that's a different experience. There's a little bit more grease and a little bit different smell in there. So I didn't really have a high sense of urgency or desire to get a bear, but I definitely love going out there and just kind of experiencing the first camping trips of the spring. A couple things about that, though, I guess, to provide some sort of value or some sort of insight. On our first trip, it was late April, and so there's definitely some grass that was popping up. Winter kind of stuck around here a little bit longer, and the spring was a little bit late getting here. It was sunny, but it just wasn't really warm yet. So we hadn't had a whole lot of warmth. It started to warm up toward the end of April, but it just kind of stayed cold for a long time. So you didn't have a lot of that grass really exploding until later on in the month. So we were out there, and there's two kind of basic ways that you can do a spring bear hunt. You can drive around in a skiff and just kind of cover miles and look at all these little inlets and kind of cruise that way, or you can pick one spot and kind of post up there. And so we picked a spot, and the plan was to take our stuff to shore, set up camp, then anchor the skiff, and then let it go dry. So when you anchor a boat, the considerations that you want to have is obviously the boat being there when you get back to it. The benefit of anchoring a boat out in the water a little bit, obviously, is that you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about moving it with the tide. So we just had I think it's an 18-foot skiff, I think that he has, maybe 16, with a kayak. So we nosed in, dropped off all the gear, and then he took the skiff out to a safe spot, anchored, and then rowed to shore in a kayak. A couple considerations when you are anchoring is you have to have enough scope. Scope is the extra line that you put out, because the boat will float the anchor. Just because it's a heavy anchor doesn't mean the boat's going to stay there. As you have a rising tide, you could have a 12-foot difference, and so your depth went from 10 feet, 4 feet, whatever it was, to adding 12 more feet. So if you don't put enough extra line out there, you're going to float the anchor, and then based on wind and based on tide, you could lose your boat. That can even happen if you have enough scope out there to not float the anchor, but it could drag the anchor, and then your boat could be in just a different spot, and it could make things difficult. So you want to look for a nice spot that has plenty of space, and it's a muddy bottom or a gravel bottom or a seaweed type bottom. So as the tide does go totally out, and then your boat is going to rest on something that's soft. There's going to be some random rocks here and there, but just choosing a good spot so you're not going to be wedged into some big rocks, or the waves or the wind aren't going to make the boat pound on a couple rocks as it's going out. Or so just be aware of where you're anchoring, making sure you have enough scope out there. 5 to 1 is kind of the minimum safe. I mean, if the weather is super, super calm and there's no wind and you're very protected, then obviously, you're going to be fine. But 5 to 1 is kind of the minimum. 7 to 1 and that's your depth to how much line you have out there. So 7 times more line out than it is deep is the recommended Coast Guard amount of scope out there, and that plays in really big if you have a big old huge expensive boat. So you have to anchor where it's a lot deeper, and if it's pretty steep where you are anchoring and you don't put up enough scope and you have an outgoing tide plus some wind, you might drag your anchor to deeper water. Then all of a sudden the anchor's floating and your boat's gone. So little tip there. That was the first spot. There was a lot of texture as you get back further to where the creek meets the timber or comes out of the woods. And so we sat for a while and we were glassing this spot, and it wasn't until pretty late in the day that I just saw the top of a back moving in the creek bottom, and that was the thing you kind of worried about. If something comes out on the grass flat, you're in good shape. But as the creek kind of cuts its way through the grass flat, you could have 5, 6, 7 feet difference in elevation. So if it drops down or comes out in the creek bed and is walking around in the creek bed, you're not going to be able to see it, or you can only see glimpses of it. And that's what happened. We were hoping that it would come out on a grass flat that was right across from us, or back where the creek was. And it came back where the creek was, and it just happened to catch a glimpse. And by the time we got back there, it had either just fed across and moved into the woods, or maybe it didn't even feed. Maybe it had been out there for a half hour. We just couldn't see it because it was down in that texture. And that's one of the unfortunate things about hunting so far away. We only had one good spot, and the wind wasn't super good. So we were glassing from quite a bit away for that spot. So yeah, it just happens, so no big deal. That was the first trip. The second trip, we camped or set up camp and then went to glass, and we saw a couple more bears. Nothing that really piqued our interest too much. And I know it sounds so like a trophy hunter type thing to not see something that piques your interest, or that it's not big enough. But again, you're out there, and it's okay to go out there and have some fun and look at some bears and then just pass. Like there's you don't have to shoot anything. You can have a good hunt, and nothing dies. So we were looking at those first bears and figured there'd probably be an opportunity for a bigger one the next night. So the next day we were out and pretty early glassing this much more substantial grass flat. Did the same thing where nosed in, dropped off the gear, and then Ryan rowed to shore in the kayak, had the boat anchored up, and this had the same sort of meandery creek, and the grass flats were much bigger, and so we were glassing for a while, and he had this Kufaru sheep tents, or sheep tarps, and that thing is awesome. It was great. So there was a little bit of mist in the morning, and then it was supposed to clear and get pretty warm and nice, which it did. So being out of the wind a little bit and then being dry was pretty sweet. I think another thing too that I think would be important to look at. You have to wear boots. You're working through some tidal flats, and so it's going to be pretty muddy. You're also going to be looking at some creek crossings. So for that reason, some people will wear waders. I've worn waders before, and it makes it nice because no creek crossing is too deep. This last time I wore Grundon's bibs, which are great because it's rubber. It breathes a lot better because it's obviously not a wader that you have the neoprene all the way in the booty. So you don't get nearly as hot. But also when you sit down on the beach, you're not going to be getting wet. If you wear rain pants and you sit down on wet beach, you will get wet. If you sit on mud, you will get wet. And if you're doing a creek crossing, obviously rain pants aren't going to keep the water out. So Grundon's bibs and Grundon's boots. The Grundon's boots have this elastic band that goes around the boot, and so you can tuck the bib or you can put that elastic thing around the bottom of the bib so it locks it in there. So then you can be walking in a creek that's higher than your boots because the rubber bib is over your boot and is held in place by that elastic thing that's on the boot. And so it's a lot easier to get around, keep you dry, which is awesome. So that's what I was running. Ryan had boots and rain pants. We got a little bit wet, but wasn't too bad. So. Sun ended up coming out, and it was around noonish when we saw this nice bear in the back. And again, that goes to show that evening tends to be a spot or a time that people really key in on bears coming out, and that is a great time to see a lot of bears. But you can see them at any point of the day, so you might be a little bit more casual with your glassing, or maybe don't cruise around quite as much. But you can see bears any time of the day, and this was around noon, so we decided to make a move. Had a creek crossing out to about 120 yards, and it looked like a nice bear. You analyze and scrutinize the bear size, and it was fairly rubbed. But you look at the triangle of the nose and the ears, and if it's a wide triangle or an equilateral triangle, I think that's what it's called, equilateral, where it's like each side is about the same size. If it's more of a narrow pie type look, then not as good. You want more of that pyramid, blocky, pumpkin type head. Small ears on the side rather than big ears on the top. So, and then also the way it walks, sometimes it just has that swagger walk to it. So we just watched it, and I think if I had my bow or he had his bow, we definitely would have gotten closer and tried to make a shot. But it's just kind of fun to watch it, and he wasn't sure that he wanted to make a shot on it. And so, if you're not sure, you don't have to just kill it just to kill it. So we watched it, and it went to this tree and scratched on this tree, which is pretty cool to watch. And it didn't look like a very big tree. And after we watched it long enough to where it eventually fed into the woods, we went to that tree and looked at the tree, and it wasn't a really big tree. So it was a decent sized bear, but not a monster. And again, that wasn't the only thing that we were looking at. But if you're rifle hunting and, there's opportunities for bears, and, we have fall bear season too. So it's not a matter of, well, I don't want to eat this tag. It's a free tag. As residents, you can get two. So if you just shoot the first thing you see, we would have shot one the first time we went out, and then we would have shot one the second time. You don't have to fill every single one of your tags when it comes to any animal, but bears in particular. It's just a lot of extra bear meat, and then what are you going to do with the hide? You don't have to coat your entire wall with bear hides. As I said, it was fun to be out there, and it was fun to watch the bear. Took some pictures, and then saw that based on that tree that it wasn't a massive bear, but it was definitely would have been one that I would have taken with a bow, but we didn't have the bow. So went back to camp, didn't regret it. He has one of the Seek Outside tents, and that's a massive, great thing for spring bear, because it does get pretty chilly at night, and you might be getting wet. So to be able to dry out I can't even. It seems like I mentioned that in every podcast. I mentioned that I hate the word game changer, and that I mentioned that I love hot tents. I think that's as consistent as anything that I ever talk about in this podcast. I absolutely love a hot tent. I do not have one, but I love them. So those are the two bear hunts I went on. During the early season, I went on another hunt late in the season. We did a different tactic. My buddy Jesse has a skiff, and so we did kind of that cruise around looking for things tactic, which was fun. And that's, you just drive around and you're looking at these inlets and just chatting. That's a lot of fun too. And again, that pace, that casual sort of, let's just drive around and let's just see what happens. You don't have to get too anxious, too worried, too desperate, too whatever. And again, that's if you didn't pay a dollar to buy this tag, you're not worried about eating it. You're not worried about anything. You can, something doesn't have to die for it to be a good hunt. You can just cruise with a buddy, and if it happens, it happens. If not, it doesn't. So we cruised around, found a couple of good spots that ended up being a really good scouting trip for him. And we saw one bear toward the end of the evening, and didn't make a move. The difficult thing about when you are cruising in the skiff is figuring out how you're going to get someone to shore, and then how you're going to do all that. But bears having poor eyesight and not a great sense of sound. It's not a super complex program, but yeah, we didn't make a move on that bear, and so yeah, the end of the season it just goes quickly. So that's the end of the spring bear story. I got caribou next month, and in between there it's going to be king salmon time, fishing time. It's been a lot of fun over here in Prince of Wales, getting out with some of my friends and getting king salmon and having fresh king salmon on the shore when we went camping. And man, it's just so much stuff to do. Talked about it with the Alaska Wild Project guys. Just there's so much to do. You just have to be going every day. You just got to go hard every single day. There's always something to do, and it's great. And the weather's been really good. So next hunt will be caribou up in the Brooks Range with Ryan. I don't think he's going to bring the hot tent, which kind of makes me sad, but it's supposed to be pretty windy up there. And then you got bugs coming up underneath it. So there's an expected level of misery for that caribou hunt, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And then alpine Sitka blacktail deer, and shoot, man, before you know it, it's going to be another summer down. Time goes so stinking fast up here because there's always something to do. You don't have those days where it's just, or those weeks that just crawl by. There's always something to do. So it's a good problem to have. So call that this episode. Make sure you check out the mediocrealaskan.com for the content, and that'll do it.